All right, hello and welcome to First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses webinar series. I'm Mike Vandervelde and I'll be your facilitator. Today, we'll discuss factors in deciding if a board of directors is best for you and your family business. We'll meet our panel in a moment, but first, just a quick reminder. The lines are muted, but at any time, please send us your questions through the webinar tool. And at this time, I'd like to introduce the host of our webinar today and also the president of First Bank, Mr. Mike Dierberg. Mike, take it away.
But today we have a great topic and some great panelists. I'll introduce the panelists first. So we have Tom Bakewell from Thomas Bakewell Consulting. Next, Don Jubel from Spartan Light Metals, and Jacob Herschend from Herschend Family Entertainment. So Tom is a guru of family business and boards. So he serves on boards, he advises boards. He wrote the book, Claim Your Place at the Boardroom Table. He's also taught for the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. So Tom's going to be our first speaker, and Tom's going to go over some of the basics of boards, and then we'll turn it over to Don and to Jacob. So Tom?
The expression of the year, you're on mute. Okay, we're coming through just fine. It's good to see y'all. Thank you, folks. It's nice to be here. It's my privilege. As mentioned, I've got a lot of experience over the years serving as an independent director or an advisory director, and it's my great passion. It's my privilege to talk to you today. My topic's board basics, and it will be really basics. When is the board required? All corporations in the United States of America, when they file to incorporate, are required to have the board. The requirements are not much. You only have to have one director. You can have a lot more. You put that in your articles and your bylaws, but you're only required to have one director. So that's the reality. It's pretty easy to do. You file it, you put it in the drawer, or do whatever you want with it. But once you're incorporated, you're off and running. You also have this concept of LLCs where they have members as opposed to directors, but it's very similar in the operation. So let's look at the chart here, and you get too far extremes in terms of having boards, family boards particularly. Most people start out with a paper board. I would say they put that in a drawer, but when they get their business going, they move on to what I would call a family-only board. Generally, it's all in the family. The family members, or everybody on the board, is a family advisor, or excuse me, family board member. The other extreme they get into, once they do that, they tend to add an advisor or two. This is what I would call an advisory-oriented board, so to speak. You have family members. You could also call this a family-dominated board. You have family members, but you bring in an advisor or two. It's usually your lawyer, your accountant, or somebody you have trust in. And then beyond that, you can actually move into adding an independent director or two. Then you get the far extreme. Now, an advisory board, got to be careful with language here. That's actually a fiduciary board as well, although some of the advisors may not be fiduciary directors. I'll clarify that here in a bit. And then you get into fiduciary boards where you can have two choices. And this is what I call a board that has independent directors. So like myself, I'm an independent director of a number of boards, and I don't hold any ownership in the company. I don't hold any stock in the company. I simply serve as an advisor. I serve at the pleasure. I'm appointed on the board, either in an advisory role or as a true independent fiduciary director. And you get the two extremes on the advisory board, fiduciary boards there. You get a family majority, or you get a very rare situation where you can actually have some very successful businesses that have operated for a long time where they go to the extent of actually having more independent members, more than they have family members. So that's an extreme there. Let's look at another scan, if we can move on, Mike, to another slide. Just another way that family business boards tend to emerge. I'm sure there's people on this call today that their family board started out as a kitchen table board, kitchen cabinets, mostly just family members and maybe a lawyer and a CPA again. That moves on to a partner board. You might have other owners. You might, simply operate as a family with another owner or two, maybe a key employee that you've given some stock to. Then it tends to move on to a strategic advisory board, is what I would call it, where you actually have some fee-based or advisory directors, but they're not necessarily statutory or independent directors. And then you move on to what I would call a strategic fiduciary board, where you, again, are appointing people who are actually serving as independent directors on that board of directors. So you have family members and truly independent directors who have key responsibilities as advisors or truly independent directors. And let's look at the difference on the next slide between what's the difference between an advisory director and a fiduciary director. Now, keep in mind that, again, going over real basics here, you have shareholders, or you could put the word owners on that slide, shareholders, owners. They appoint the board of directors. It could be one person, it could be several people. Again, the articles and bylaws call that out, and then the board of directors appoints the officers who operate the day-to-day running of the company. So a fiduciary director, here's what goes down with a fiduciary director. You're formally appointed, you're legally approved and formally appointed. Liability attaches, key distinction there, liability attaches, and you have a formal duty of care or a duty of loyalty. Those are absolute duties that you have, both those, and they're very important. And those duties attach not just to individual shareholders, but the entire company. Then you have the other options, an advisory director. You simply give advice, your liability is very nominal or limited, and you have an informal appointment. Usually it's not in the records of the statutes of the corporation or what's filed with the state. You're just simply asked to serve on the board, and you serve at the pleasure. So those are the key rundowns that you get into when you're looking at it. Again, the role of the shareholders or the owners is basically to appoint the directors. They can occasionally have a few other key roles. The other key roles might be if you're going to do a merger or acquisition or sell part of the business. That's the key roles of the shareholders. The shareholders appoint the directors. The directors have an oversight of the management team as they run the business, hiring, firing, looking over strategy, looking over risk, and then in turn, the directors are responsible for engaging management in the day-to-day running of the business. Mike, that's about as fast a top line as I can give you on the basics of family business and corporations. So.
Great. Well, really appreciate it, Tom. Nice background information for the following discussion. So let's bring Don and Jacob in if we can. So, again, I think we have the benefit of these two great companies, and both companies have had boards for a number of years, and they're both pretty sizable companies and have some good experience with this. So first I'll turn to you, Don. If you could, give a little bit of information about the company, real brief, and then about your board, how long it's been around, what you guys do, how often you meet, those sorts of things, and any evolution in the board you've had.
Sorry about that. Just a little bit of background. Our company is about 1,000 employees, second generation. We're just 61 years old and started by my father's, and then I took over 45 years ago. So I'm just a second generation CEO, but now just chairman. We have now an outside CEO who runs our company. And we started, I guess, with a board around 1995. And we were just, before that, we were just like Tom said, we had a kitchen board. In fact, I remember my father just saying, okay, we're going to have we just had a board meeting. I go, what do you mean? And he said, well, just sign this. Okay. And he asked my mother, just sign this. Okay. And we just signed whatever document it was. And then he said, okay, pass the syrup. That was the end of our breakfast family board meeting. So we've evolved a lot. And how did we get started into the board? The reason we got started is we were running into situations that neither my father or myself had ever dealt with before. And I felt I'd started attending some seminars on family outside boards with SIU Carbondale, and then I tried to convince my father that it was time to start a board. I won't have to go into that now unless you want to ask me more, but it was not easy. He was not in favor of it, but I was kind of like Chinese water torture on him. And then finally, I was able to have someone who sets up family boards talk with him. He agreed to do it, and then we started. So, and that's one of the suggestions I was going to have if you get started. Sometimes it's hard to get the older generation to, and really engage with this, and it does help to seek outside help. So, I don't know, Mike, if I covered most of what you were looking
You did.
forward.
One thing you mentioned, you said you were just 61 years old, the company, right? If I heard that right. Kind of speaks to that long-term perspective that family businesses can have. So why don't we bring Jacob to come back into the conversation here. And so those of you may not recognize the name Herschend, but you should, or many of you anyway, would recognize the name Silver Dollar City or Dollywood. So a host of entertainment properties that are part of the family business. So Jacob, if you could talk about the business and also then about the board and your evolution.
Well, hey, Mike, thank you very much for having Don and I and Tom on today to talk about this topic. It's definitely near and dear to our family and our business. So as Mike just mentioned, we are Silver Dollar City, Dollywood, and some other parks across the country, all underneath the banner of Herschend Family Entertainment. We are 72 years young as of this year. And I am the end of the third generation. We have fourth generation and fifth generation coming up in the ranks. But we have about 10,000 plus employees across our organizations. But I would say in the late 70s, early 80s is when we decided to build a board of directors. And it was very similar to kind of the case model that you would assume. We had a board of directors that had family members on there, and then we had our banker and attorneys on there and some other folks in the community. But we decided in the early 80s, my dad and my uncle decided in the early 80s to start looking at building out the board to make it more robust. And they did it primarily because they started chatting with other family-owned businesses about how they look at their path forward. And they started asking the question, how do you grow the right way? And the people said, you got to have people in the room that are smarter than you. And so they started looking outside of kind of the four walls of the family and friends that were in the area. And they said they went to bigger communities and towns and started talking with them.
Great. So let's talk about the benefits of having a board. Jacob, let's stay with you. So talk a little bit about what you've seen as the benefits, and we'll go to Don and then back to Tom.
Yeah. The biggest benefit is that, we kind of joke about this a lot in our family, is that, we got the genetic lottery. We got to be born into the family, which is awesome, but it also doesn't mean that we're the smartest people in the room. And so getting other people's wisdom and vision and understanding of where business is and where business has gone, and allowing for them to help us to lead the company is great for us. There's a really famous quote by Wayne Gretzky. The reason why he's a great hockey player is that he skated to where the puck was always going to go, never where it was. And so when you have a board of directors that has wisdom and vision and has seen pieces of this kind of puzzle, they can share to us and how to grow. It's great food and great conversations that can happen, and that leadership skill transcends down into everybody else in the company.
Great. Don, what would you add?
We started with our board selecting what I call expertise in certain areas, not that they wouldn't all contribute, but for our case, we had someone that we selected four in the beginning, four independent directors, one in manufacturing, one in finance, one in legal, and one familiar with family businesses. And so, but back to what Jacob said, the wisdom part, I'd say, is really critical in being objective and really sometimes willing to tell you stuff that no one else will tell you. Your lawyers won't tell you, your accountants won't tell you, your employees won't tell you, but it's just being willing to say some things and be really candid with it and transparent with it. And sometimes it's medicine difficult to swallow. But one of the good things about independent directors is most of these directors, folks, don't need your board fees to put bread on their table. Okay, they are normally definitely do not need to be on your board. So, but with that being said, you listen to them more and really want to adhere to their advice. And I have a thing that when 2 or 3 of them are kind of like going northeast, I don't go southwest. Okay, so that's kind of my phrase, that when they're all kind of going around the same conclusion, you better really listen to it. So, anyhow.
Tom, what about you? What would you add?
You're on mute, Tom. Sorry. Tom, you're on mute. Sorry. There you go, Tom.
There we go. Okay, there we go. I'm really showing my stripes here today. Okay. Well, as an independent director, I feel a little conflicted in saying, all the great values of it, but the reality is you need people to challenge your thinking. And a truly independent director, kind of touching on what Don said about, they're there because they want to be there, and they're there because they are passionate about what they're doing. I think the other thing, and I'm going to go off script just a bit, Mike, is here's what I would add. Obviously, both these boards and Mike Dierberg, your family business board, are very long-term, very experienced. They have very high-profile boards in many, many ways. And what I would say to everybody on this call, it doesn't matter where you started. It doesn't matter how big or small your company is. It doesn't matter how young or mature your company is. There's one common thing that I would say everybody on this call has, and that's that they have a vision to continue their business legacy. And I think that's one of the things that an outside board can help you do, is continue your legacy and your vision, even when you may not be around.
Great, thanks,
that's
Tom.
The point I would make. Yeah.
So, the headline for our webinar today is deciding if a board of directors is best for your family business. You might want to rephrase the question based on things you talked about, Tom, and Don, things that you've seen, that it's a range of boards. There's not just one size fits all for every company, and there's not just one type of board. So I want to talk a little bit about the experience you guys have had and what you've seen by way of advisory boards versus more fiduciary boards. And maybe I'll go back to you, Don, because I know your company has a fiduciary board, but you've served on advisory boards as well. So can you talk about the different experience on both types of boards?
It goes to one of the slides that Tom had on there, where you have the advisory board and the fiduciary board. On the fiduciary board, you have legal responsibility with the company, and so and a lot of times, okay, you have directors and officers insurance, but that's that just covers in case you get a suit from a shareholder, or a suit from an employee. But I'd say the fiduciary board will make decisions as what the dividends, if you pay dividends, what they're going to be, and approve that. So what we've done, Mike and Nancy, we've had with our advisory board, these are the decisions. Sometimes they're in a recommend vote. I think this is what the advisory board recommends. This is what the fiduciary board approves. And that is kind of and then everyone as a fiduciary board member is also in it by our legal documents, is also an advisory board member. So they can sit in on any kind of discussion. But there's not we don't have like advisory board meetings and fiduciary board meetings. We really kind of have them together. But when it comes down to approving something, then that is left with the fiduciary board members.
Thanks. And Tom, you talked about this, the different range of boards and sort of the evolution. So for the families that are listening and thinking about boards, where to take their board if they already have one, what guidance would you give about what's right for different family businesses?
Sure. Yeah, well, the best board is the one that works for you. That sounds a little simplistic, but if you've not had a board at all with any outside directors, then you start with an advisory director, and maybe you add to it. If that goes well, then you look at formally having an independent director, and that can make people nervous as a cat putting on somebody that might have a vote. Now, the reality is shareholders can always remove a director if they need to, if they don't have a good fit. But let me make this comparison between advisory directors and fiduciary directors. and I've been both. I'm happy to be either one. When I'm an advisory director, I don't worry about the liability. That's easy. Okay, thanks very much. I'm just giving you my advice. But here's the reality I've seen. On a long-term basis, advisory boards are really hard to keep engaged. It's a lot harder to keep engaged in terms of being active. It's kind of no guts, no glory. You just want me to tell you what I think. Fine, I'll do that. And it's just a little bit of a higher standard. I'll say it another way. I often see governing boards that get real benefit with statutory directors over the long term and real value. I don't see so much of that when it's just an advisory member or two in terms of the long term. I don't see the long-term effectiveness. That's not to say advisory boards can't work. Either one can be very effective, but it tends to be, people tend to take it more serious when I'm going to, again, channel back to Don, where he's talking about, we brought in some very serious directors, people that don't really have to be there if they don't want to. And Jacob, I heard him echo the same thing when they made the transition as well to going from lawyers and advisors and local people to really full-time independent directors. So that's the distinction I would make. Either one can do you well, but and if you haven't started anywhere, then start with an advisor or two. And if that's going well, then add your first independent director and see how it goes.
We've talked about the benefits of having a board, but let's talk about the challenges as well. So maybe Jacob, you could talk about, let's start with the time commitment. How often does the board meet? What's the time commitment from the board? How much time is it from a management standpoint? You think, in terms of preparation for the board?
Well, so to answer that question, the way we're set up, we have 2 family members that are on the board, and we have 1 inside board member, which is our CEO, and then we have 4 outside board members. Those are all CEOs or CFOs or COOs of companies. And all of those folks are going to be on various committees. So finance to governance to development and so on. I would say probably they're going to be spending anywhere between 10 to 15 hours a month, probably working through finances and emails and conversations within leadership and also. So it's going to be some time. They're going to take some time to get familiar with it, visiting the properties possibly, and understanding the vision behind everything.
Don, what about you?
We meet, the advisory board and fiduciary board meets 4 times a year. It's normally at least a 4-hour session. 1 time a year, we make a day-and-a-half retreat where our CEO presents a strategic plan. And then we have 2 committees. One is a finance committee, one is a human capital and compensation committee. They meet about maybe twice within a quarter. But time-wise, and that's one thing I wanted to share with everyone is when you set these boards up, if you decide to do that, be aware that it is going to take time. You're going to spend time with calling board members. I see Jacob nodding his head. I'm just chairman now, but I spend a lot of time. I'm ex officio at every committee member thing, and there's a lot of time in between just having phone calls, and sometimes there's a particular topic that I want to ask a board member on their expertise. So all of our board, and let me add one more thing is if you have a board member and you're never engaging them or calling them or having lunch with them or breakfast with them, they'll probably get disinterested because they will really feel that they're not being utilized. So I caution that, you got to do what I call touch points with them. So.
Yeah, I think to what Don, Jacob have said, it's a significant time commitment. Didn't mention at the outset, Tom Bakewell is also on our board, on First Bank's board. And so whatever the amount of time is the board members are spending, you can count on the management team spending far more time just to get ready for it. So it is a major commitment. I will say I think we've gotten a lot of value out of having independent board members and having the board to help guide us. So this has been great for us. Why don't we turn over to questions? Mike, what questions do we have?
Sure. And just a quick reminder, folks, you can submit a question right through the webinar tool. Just open it up, type it in, and we'll get that addressed. So we do have one here that says, do you have any recommendations on overcoming the resistance to having a board by an old school founder who is used to not seeking or wanting input?
No names with that question, right?
Anybody got old school? Who wants to take on old school?
Don, go ahead.
Well, it was kind of like my father was not, his phrase to me was, you and I have run this business for 25 years. Who else do we need to help tell us what to do? And I was, like I said, I was the son that was, the son, okay? He didn't really look at me as, a vice president of the company. I was just a son, too much of an age gap. And that's where I said, finding someone close, I didn't say the same age, but within a decade, I would say. So if your older generation is in the 60s, and you better be having somebody around in at least their 50s talking to that older generation. But I would not, and then it would be hopefully someone that would know what I would call be able to connect to that older generation. And that's why I'm saying, the age situation, but also that older generation, they're gonna size them up, okay? And so you gotta have somebody that you have confidence in that will connect to that older generation. And that's what I really stress, that word connect. After we started our board, in July 1995, well, guess who was on the phone with the board members all the time? Not me, my father, okay? So he was the one calling them all the time, and he said, well, you know what so-and-so said about this? You know what so-and-so, and so I just smiled because the connection was made, okay? So that would be my suggestion, is to try to get a third party to help you with that, but someone that your older generation would respect their opinions.
I would echo that, and the amount of wisdom that can come from family-owned businesses that have already gone down this path to going to founders of first-generation businesses is invaluable. And if there's any kind of empathy that they can impart to those businesses, is that there is great understanding and great business leadership by bringing other family owners into that conversation.
Great. Mike, should we go next question?
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Next question is, how often do you think avoiding conflict contributes to the failure of a family or other business? And any recommendations for dealing with them sooner than later? And that reminds me of a session that we've had before, Mike, dealing with conflict.
Yeah, and if I could add a twist to that, I would say, add on to that, what role can the board play in navigating family conflict?
I'll take a stab at that one.
Yeah,
so we, in our family business, we actually use the board of directors to help make hard decisions, which is great. We have, there's a couple of different examples of this that have kind of come down the path, but the biggest thing is that back in the day, the reason why we have an outside board of directors versus internal is because sometimes my dad and my uncle, when they were growing up and down in the Ozarks, they would say that they actually understood what the business, where it was going and what the direction needed to go. And they felt adamant that they're going to build a property in another location, and the board of directors, which was an outside group of folks, came back and said, we don't have the money to do that. We can't, or we don't think the capital should be used that way. And my dad and my uncle didn't agree with it, but that's the reason why the board's there. The board was there to help advise them in that difficult decision. And it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Same thing with COVID. When COVID happened, our board of directors, outside board of directors, said, get cash on your books. This is going to stick around for a while. Great advice.
Tom, what about you? What thoughts do you have?
Well, when it comes to conflict, as you said, you've done a program on it. It was a great program, and it never hurts to have outside consultant. And I'm not talking as somebody who does it. I'm talking today as an independent director, and I've been on many a board where we've had a consulting psychologist or whatever. But you got to deal with the family stuff. That's one of the first things that comes to dealing with the board. And my simple tip would be back to there's a huge, enormous difference between appointing somebody who's an independent director and having somebody who's truly independent minded. The best independent directors are truly independent minded, and they can speak into, look, if you're putting a board together and you're in charge and you're picking the first board member and they're your guy or your gal, that may not work with the family, so to speak. The conflict may not continue. But if you get people who are truly fair-minded, truly independent-minded, and truly experienced, they can, in fact, help be that buffer to start dealing with the conflict issue. And, Mike, I'm thinking also of a program you've done before, not only the one on conflict, but the great family business program you did on, what kinds of rooms do you have in your board? Another topic for another day, but great presentation. And there's ways to approach these issues, and you got to get the pros involved. And a good independent director or a good advisory director can be the pro you might want to start with.
And I would add, when we actually did a two-part series on conflict, because it is obviously a big issue in family businesses, but just totally avoiding the conflict in the family business, that's not a great strategy. And so it's finding the right balance, not having unnecessary conflict, but there's things you need to, I think as both you guys have touched on, there are things you need to deal with as a family business. And I do think to what you guys have said, like that the board can be a filtering mechanism, independent views that would really help. So it depersonalizes things so that someone's not viewing it as, this person has this opinion because it's my brother, my sister, my, niece, nephew, whatever it is. And have these independent views that can help navigate some of these more difficult decisions in a family business. So Mike, why don't we go to the next question?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Don, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd like to add something about the conflict thing. Is we also have a family business consultant. And if there's really conflicts between individual family members, we've leaned on them. And not really used the advisory board members to do that. And so that's another tool, that we have. And now occasionally too, the outside board members will talk to the family business consultant. But we found that, and I know that's not this session, but we have a family council that does more family type of things and less business type of things. So.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And the conflict I'm thinking about where a board could come into play is, let's say there's two family members who want to be CEO. How do you decide that? And so to having, you could have an outside consultant, go through the process with you, which you might want to do that anyway. That's probably a good practice to do regardless. But on top of that, then to have outside board members could help make that call. And they're presumably not making that call, not just based on, they're not making it based on a family connection. They're making it based on what's in the best interest of the company.
Yeah, I would say that was one thing I was going to bring up, is that conflict inside of a family is inherent. It happens inside families. The business needs to have some kind of separation between the business and the family to deal with that. And so if you're looking at it from a board of advisors to deal with the family conflict, that's not their role.
Yeah, that's right.
The board's role is to help run the company. The family council or advisor is to be there to help help deal with family conflict.
And if I could add on and mention, one very sophisticated tool to help deal with that as well as these family councils. That's beyond the scope of today. But we're talking about getting a board going. Well, you can have a family council as well. We can touch on that and help with that. Let me mention the most common source of conflict that I've seen in many, many years of doing this work. Most common source of conflict is where you have a family. Let's say you've got 4 members owning the company. One of them works in the company, and 3 of them work outside of the company. And there's always a debate and a dispute about how much pay that person working in the company should make vis-a-vis the person outside of the company. Well, wait a minute, they should only get paid a lot of money if they grow the wealth of everybody. And they're thinking, no, I want a fair market value for what I'm earning and what I'm doing. And that's a very, that one shows up all the time. Very common.
So that's actually a good segue to the next question, which is asking, what is your advice on various options to consider for board member compensation?
I can start with that. We do quarterly fees that we pay each well, by the way, we pay it to all the directors, family or independent, it's the same. And so we pay a quarterly fee. If you serve on a committee, there is a fee you get. If you're a chair of a committee, it's a higher fee that you get. And typically, like if we're doing phone calls or lunches or breakfasts, those are part of your retainer fee, that quarterly fee. If it's a lengthy special meeting, 2 or 3 hours, and it's not a normal committee, we will compensate for that.
Tom, what do you see?
Yeah, I can break that down pretty quickly. First of all, up until about 5 years ago, there wasn't really good data out there available, but today there's a lot of good data available on that. A lot of the governance associations have really good data on that. Second thing I'd say is if you're just starting somewhere, keep in mind of a number in terms of your professional advisors. It's not exact, but it's a nice place to start if you've never had a director before. And the reality is you can find today, if you go looking, you can find really good people that are of value. You get the dilemma you get is what Don mentioned earlier and Jacob's alluded to. They have very sophisticated, very experienced directors. Don said the people that are coming on your board don't necessarily want it. And sometimes that can play in your advantage. I know a major family business, it's in a very small town, and they have a major corporation. The only other business in that town other than theirs is a major U.S. corporation. Well, they have a wealth of retired executives from that big corporation that are looking for opportunities. So, you can find boards and I'm not going to throw a number, but if you want to work at it, you can find it and you can start it and you can find really, really good members at a fair price.
Why don't we try 1 or 2 more questions? You got more questions?
Yeah, and actually that was another really good segue to this next question. Have any of you transitioned your boards from family members who may not be strong members to outside board members who bring in real experience?
So, the short answer is yes. We've definitely done that. We've transitioned. We've had family members that have been on our board that have shown great opportunity for growth, but we decided that we needed to bring in another outside voice, and so we've done that.
All right, very good. A couple of comments here saying, advice only works when you follow it. Some great examples of that for sure. Let's see. There is another question here along the lines of conflict. Going forward, what would you suggest is the best way to prevent a disagreement from turning into a conflict and an argument?
I could weigh in on that a little bit. I think one of the things I've noticed about our board members is they argue the issue and they never personalize it. And I remember one time 2 of them got into a very heated disagreement about a path that we were to follow. And they finally said to my father, okay, you're the CEO. You've heard from both of us. You need to decide. And our senior managers were in there, and they thought, oh my gosh, they're going to come to blows. And the meeting ended, and they walked out of the room, and they said, you know, we have dinner with our wives on Saturday night. We're going to such and such a restaurant. I mean, it's like it never even occurred, the argument. Okay, but they argued the issue, and they never personalized it. Now, that I would say that's harder with family members getting into a disagreement on a strategy, because we, as family, we will personalize it, you know. And that's when the board has to kind of come in and keep it objective, and, you know, and not personalizing it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I would to link your questions. So, you know, the comment about following advice. I mean, I think this thing with the family members, as Don, you were saying, it's, you know, we know we shouldn't personalize it, but it happens. And so, the you know, advice is to try to avoid as much as you can as a family member personalizing a business question or dispute. But obviously, that's sometimes easier said than done. Jacob, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add one quick little anecdote. So we haven't done this a lot, but we've done it a handful of times back in the 80s. And it was basically when we had a business decision on how we were going to run something, and we had leadership. So it would be my dad and my uncle, and they would say we should go one direction, and they would both disagree on how that direction should go. They made a decision that the board was going to would make the voting decision on it, but they had to take the other person's stance and present it to the board. And so it was never personalized that way, and they had to present it as though it was their own idea. And they had to make the argument to the board, and the board then made the decision, and that was the de facto decision at the end of that meeting. And so there was somebody who got it and someone who didn't get it, and that was a great way to make sure that they could do their job, and they were okay with the decision, and it dealt with conflict very well.
Thanks, Jacob. Well, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. I appreciate the listeners listening in. I think really helpful information. So Don, Tom, Jacob, thank you guys so much. You know, again, we mentioned some of the webinars we've done on some of these topics, and so I'm going to put a plug in for those. There's two different ones on conflict. We also had Josh Barron, author of the Family Business Handbook. He did a symposium. We turned that into a webinar, so you can watch that as well. And that's really helpful in terms of putting the board in context of the other elements of family governance. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike for a final word.
Very good. Thanks so much. And there were a few other questions and comments that we did get in. Just to let you know, we will get answers back to you individually after the session is over. But I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. A special thank you to Tom, Jacob, and Mike and Don for their expertise. Please take just a few minutes to fill out a brief survey. It's going to pop up right when you exit the session. It will help us provide better service to you. With that said, have a great day, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.